You're listening to the 95Podcast from the team at 95 Network, where we host conversations specifically designed to support leaders in small and mid-sized churches.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the 95 Podcast. This is Dale Sellers, the Executive Director at 95 Network. And once again, today, we're excited to have someone that you're going to have to listen more intently to understand because he has a foreign accent.
Oh, that's the way to start, Dale. I appreciate it.
I have my friend Michael Rubino today with me, and he lives on Long Island in New York.
So he got that right. Now you redeemed yourself. We're not in Long Island. You're on Long Island. Good job, Dale.
You are on Long Island in New York. And Michael and I have kind of known each other through social media for a while, but we've gotten connected to our friend Carl Vader's last year. Well, we're recording this now in March of 2023. In August of the previous year, we met together with some folks at Compassion International. And I got to know Michael and his very conservative, quiet, low-key wife, Heather. And that's a joke, by the way. And just our hearts just immediately knit together. And Michael pastors, and I'll get him to tell you all about that in a minute. But the thing I love about him, he has a tremendous passion for the small and the mid-sized church. He's been doing a lot of work in this space as well. And we recently were in Alabama together doing a conference, and I guess just got to see his heart and what he's doing, and was just so blown away by his communication. And so I think you guys are really going to love this podcast today. Michael will be a great resource for you moving forward. And so Michael, let's take a moment, if you would, and let's just hear your story. You're on Long Island in New York and been in that area most of your life. So kind of walk us through your story a little bit.
Yeah, I'm a New Yorker, born and bred, family from Brooklyn. Just love this place, love the Northeast. You know, we went to Alabama together. I think, I brought my passport just in case, make sure they let me in. It was like my cousin Vinny part 2 ministry style, the two youths. It was a lot going on, but we had a blast. And Dale, I got to tell you, before I jump into what God's doing in our lives and my story, I just want to thank you for that soul care conference that you did, because I got to tell you, it was transformative for my wife and I. And I asked the pastor yesterday at his ordination, how do you plan on Sabbathing? When are you delighting in the Lord? How are you doing that? And it stopped him like in his tracks. And I just, the work you're putting in, the value you're adding to the kingdom for pastors, I'm not trying to blow you up. I'm just trying to say you're doing a great job, and I appreciate you.
Well, a lot of my things that I do today, and even trying to get people to meet you and folks like you and Carl, comes out of my own pain. There were so many times that I was just so lonely pastoring for the 12 years that I led the small church that I did. And today, pastors don't have to say that anymore. There are opportunities. There are resources available. And that's why I wanted to have you on. I appreciate your kind words. But I was just as equally as blown away by you. And actually, I'm going to be real transparent. I told you this to your face. But I used to follow you on Twitter. And then there was just a season that it was just like, dude, everything you post is like you're mad at somebody. So I unfollowed you.
Yeah. Well, Twitter is the appropriate social media channel for rage. And I just got real cranky on the season of ministry that I just was not enjoying. It was like a desert season, and it came out. And I remember when I started looking at my own feed, and I was like, I better just shut up. Like, no one needs to, this is not encouraging at all.
I unfollowed you, but then when I realized when we were together in Colorado Springs, so you were, I followed you again.
Yeah, I had a season of being the anti-Barnabas. I had the gift of discouragement.
I'm like, my goodness, this dude is he's mad. So, but anyway, you're not mad anymore. And so tell us your story. Tell us your story, bro.
So I'm a non-traditional ministry guy. You're probably not surprised by that. So, I grew up in a very, very typical New York, Sicilian upbringing, heavy on culture, hardworking, just love life, but very passionate. And had a few things go on early on in life that really got me confused about whether I had a relationship with God or whether it was just my parents and I was along for the ride and kind of went and did my own thing for a while. And God just started to call me back, right? Just called me back to him. And I always like to say this when people say, well, why do you love the church so much? Because the church is such a mess, right? And here's what I say. Jesus saved me,
Amen.
but he used the local church to shape me.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So Jesus saved me. I have eternal life through him and him alone. But what he did for me here on this earth through his bride, the church, changed my whole life. So
Amen.
yes, it's messy. And yes, it's imperfect. And yes, we make, crazy decisions sometimes, but God uses the church to save, just to shape, I should say, to shape lives. And he used it to shape mine. So as I started to get called more and more into ministry, I started to get what I was calling a Holy Spirit dissatisfaction with my regular job. So I had hit the American dream part, Dale. You hit that point you're looking for, the wife, the 2 kids, the dog, the house in the right neighborhood. And I just knew that where I was meant to be was in the local church serving the Lord. And slowly but surely, he just started moving me in that direction. And I'll never forget this. This might surprise you. It might not. When I told one of the pastors I knew that I felt called to go into ministry, he said, well, you're going to stay in the Northeast. And I said, where else would I go? And he said, this is the graveyard for the local church, right? There's another pastor serving at a church near me. And I said, well, you know what? My God resurrects dead things. So I guess the best place to see his power is in a graveyard. And that was it. At that moment, God kind of solidified my heart for this place.
Yeah.
And started opening doors for me to move into ministry.
Well, that's a huge highlight there. For those of us in the South or the Midwest or the West or in other parts of America, we talk about this, but unless you've been there to experience it, it's very difficult to explain the attitude in the Northeast toward Christianity and toward the church. I mean, they'll tolerate it. It's the kind of the vibe I get, but to find real Bible believing churches where the Lord is moving and lives are being changed is not the norm. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Oh, yeah. So first of all, there's no such, equivalent phrase to bless your heart in New York. People just tell you exactly what's on their mind.
Yep.
So if you cross a certain line and there's going to be pushback. So just to give you some statistics, where I live, I'm right in between Manhattan and the Hamptons, to give you guys some context. Right? It's named Long Island because it's a Long Island.
Yes.
And there are 2 counties, Nassau and Suffolk. 3.6 to 4 million people. Okay. 600 churches. Half of those churches aren't even orthodox in their doctrine. Right. So now we're talking 300, solid churches of different denominational stripes, but solid theologically. And out of those 300 churches, only about 50 are actually thriving or growing in any kind of way. That's 50 healthy churches to meet the need of almost 4 million people. That's where I minister.
And 4 million people, of which most don't even know they need to hear. They don't even know they need the gospel. So, Michael, what's it like doing ministry in the Northeast?
It's different. It's different. We essentially qualify as an unreached people group. So when I grew up, because of the heritage of Catholicism, at least most of my peers had some understanding of God, Jesus, the Bible. I mean, most of what they understood was somewhat wrong, right? They knew more about Mary than anything, but at least it was a framework and an acceptance that this was, it was okay. My children, growing up around kids whose parents and some grandparents have never stepped foot in a church.
Wow.
And aren't neutral about religion at all. They actually lean more towards not liking it, rejecting it, just on general principle.
Yeah. Has the political divide been hard there?
Yeah. So New York is a mixed bag. So I know everyone sees New York and they see us through the lens of the city, right? So people say New York, they mean New York City, but actually New York has some distinct components. We have upstate New York, we're very similar to Pennsylvania. We have the Westchester, Hudson Valley, a little bit New Englandy. Then you have all the boroughs around Manhattan, very different flavors, but generally pretty left-leaning progressive. And then you have Long Island, which is pretty well read and conservative. So that makes for some very interesting political dynamics because there's a little bit of pockets of everything everywhere. So there isn't a lot of homogeneous political opinions. So you're always stepping into a minefield, no matter what the issue is.
Wow. What is the biggest today, the biggest challenge of just sharing Jesus there on Long Island?
Biggest challenge is just getting people to understand who Jesus is, not who they think he is. So a lot of what we have to do is deconstruct some very false, misconceptions about who Christ is, what he came to do, and what Christians are, because basically we've just been a caricature they've seen on social media, on memes. And so whenever I meet someone and I get to know them, I won't tell them that I'm a pastor at first, because I'll tell them at a strategic time, so they have to think twice, go, wait a second, I thought you were normal. But okay, so let's face it, I'm not that normal. But at least they know I'm not the religious person they have in their mind.
Oh man, just the things facing you are how do you keep yourself from just getting discouraged and moving to South Carolina?
Well, I tried. They sent me back. I actually got deported back to New York. So,
well, hey, I'll keep you. So if you want to come here, we'll find a place for you.
You know what's really been encouraging to me? Number one is brothers like yourself and others who have national ministries like Carl, who just have taken an interest in the Northeast and in New York, and have just supported and are willing to come across the bridges and the tunnels, and are willing just to co-labor. And that's been a huge encouragement. And then there's been a little bit of freedom when it just clicked that God is not dependent on Mike Rubino, right? So none of the outcome is based on me at all. My only real role here is to be obedient to what God has called me to. So what I've just kind of done is I kind of lean into my calling, focus on being obedient, and then I just trust God with the whole outcome piece. I don't try to get lost in that, because that could be discouraging.
Oh, well, dude, I wrote a book about it. When I wrote Stalled, it was just because I felt like a failure because I hadn't built a mega church. And, I often say we live in the residue of the seeker and attractional movements. And though they had some good merit as far as reaching new people, I don't think discipleship and building a church for the next, for a lasting church was at the forefront of the thinking there. And so I know the pressure and that it feels like, and when you're there in a situation like you're in, when there's so much opposition even to the gospel, how do you keep from just giving up, or how do you keep yourself healthy?
I just try to love. The more I fall in love with the Lord and the more I spend time with him, it makes it easier to love people. Like when I don't lean into loving the Lord and spend time with him and really find those moments like you talk about, delighting in him and what he's doing in me, right? Not just through me. If I'm not doing that, I really don't like a whole lot of people. So it's really just learning to love like Jesus, and just, recognizing this, right? Everyone who doesn't know Jesus, right, is not my enemy, right? Even if they think they're my enemy, I actually have no enemies. My enemies as a Christian is principalities and powers.
Amen.
Right? Every person who doesn't know Jesus is a POW. And you don't shoot at POWs. You set them free. So far too often, Christians shoot at unsaved people verbally on their social media, take shots at them, but really they're not your enemy. They're POWs. They desperately need to be set free. And I always just try to remember, like Paul says, I'm the chiefest of sinners. I didn't help Paul to be all things to all men. Well, I got to tell you, Dale, there have been moments in my life where I've lived out I am the chiefest of sinners, like Paul said. So, man, I'm so grateful for God's grace. Like, who am I not to give it to anybody?
Okay, so you said I'll press into loving Jesus, or however you said it. You know me, I'm Mr. Practical. I want to know how you do that.
I spend a lot of time just reading his word and then meditating in a little bit of silence. Now, I'll be real transparent. There are times I struggle with when I get quiet, not letting my mind start to fill the empty spaces. You start to think about what's going on later, what's going on in church, or you start thinking about it in terms of sermon prep. And I just try to fight against that. And then I just try to cultivate a heart of gratitude by just stealing these little moments. Like my wife and my children and even my church, or these moments, I'll just kind of gaze. And gaze is the word I'm looking for when they're not paying attention, and just give God some glory for that. And it's weird. I'll give him 5 seconds of glory looking at my wife when she doesn't notice, and he will fill my heart with love for her for a month. Like, he just always meets you so far ahead of where you make one step, he comes 4 miles.
You know, his word says, in running the race, you need to fix your eyes on him. That's gaze. Yeah. Fix your gaze, fix your eyes on him. The reason I'm saying that is I have led 95 Network. By the time this podcast goes live, I'll be 5 years leading the network. And so over this time of working with hundreds of thousands of churches now all across the country, one of the things that happens is you start recognizing patterns, and you start recognizing things about just church and ministry and that kind of thing. And there's a couple of things that I want you to speak to that I have noticed. One of the things I have noticed is, specifically in the small and mid-sized church space, is we do a lot of things poorly instead of one or two things really well, which leads to number two. Most of our pastors don't Sabbath because they're so busy. And I think that might be an intention of the enemy.
Yeah.
To get us busy. And so we feel like we're being productive when we're just wearing ourselves out. So first of all, talk a little bit about what you see or what you think about, are we doing too much as small churches, and what you think the motive behind that might be?
Yeah, I would say that, first, I struggle with that term small church, right? I struggle with it. For a little while, I used the term normal size church. I didn't like the way that sounded. Then I put average church, and that sounded too average, right? But I'm going to start using the term a little bit majority size church, because the truth is, the numbers shift from time to time. But I would say, right, 90% of all churches are under 250, give or take. Right, so that's in the ballpark.
Been true forever. I mean, it's just been true.
The majority size church cannot continue to try to compete with the budgets and the resources of the mega churches that it compares itself to. And when we do that, it creates these layers of complexity in these customer service models that are not sustainable with our budgets, our resources, our people, nor are they actually necessary.
You use two words, compete and compare, that will destroy you. That, again, referring to my book, that's where I was, man. And it was an inside job. So like if I had grown up with you, let's say you and I went to school together, and we go on, and I've shared this example many times, but you go on and you start pastoring, I start pastoring, and your church goes 300-400 people, and my church is still running 50, 60, 70 people. I was so bad off that if I saw you and Heather, let's just say Jen and I were going to eat and you guys were in the same restaurant, if you didn't see me, I would duck out. Just so I didn't have to talk to you, because I was embarrassed. It wasn't I didn't want to see you. I didn't want you to see me. And at the heart, underneath the surface of that, was this compete and comparison thing. It about destroyed me.
Yeah. And you said something in the beginning of that, in the front end of the question, that really struck a nerve with me. I think we often think of Satan as he hasn't destroyed me, right? And maybe he hasn't, but if he could just distract you,
there you go.
He can do a lot of damage by just distracting you. So part of how we push back against that at Cornerstone is we really are laser focused on our mission and vision. Our values aren't just pretty words on a wall. We really try to live them out. And then through all of those things, we weave simplicity. Simple. We do relationship really well. Now, that doesn't mean we don't value growth. It doesn't mean that we aren't intentional at trying to grow God's kingdom, not necessarily Cornerstone. If Cornerstone grows, it's really an outgrowth of our heart's desire to grow God's kingdom. Right? So that's almost like not necessary for us. Like if we're reaching people with the gospel and people end up at other churches, there's still victory in that. So don't hear me. We do care about growing. We want to see Cornerstone flourish and reach our neighborhood, but we don't get lost in the fact that we can't have an 8-piece worship band with the exact right haze, and we can't have petting zoos during certain kids events. And listen, no, I love a good petting zoo, right? I'm not down. I'll pick up a chicken or a duck or whatever they got at these things, whatever, right? I'm not mad.
Jesus made them.
And I'm not mad at the big church, and I'm not mad at the mega. I love the ministry they do.
Yeah.
I just know that that's not the ministry God has called our church to, and that's okay.
Oh, we could talk about that all day, but I want to ask you the second half of that thing. So talk to me about pastors and Sabbath. What do you see?
What I see is, by and large, we don't take them. We preach them. We talk about them. We talk to our church people about them. We challenge them to practice Sabbath, and then we don't do it. And I didn't even realize that till about 15 years into the ministry when my wife looked at me. And Dale, this is what you know my wife, so she was not gentle about this right, at all. It was brutal. It was blood on the floor. And she said, Mike, just so we're clear here, the church is not your bride. It's the bride of Christ. And you're confused and you think it's your wife and you treat me like I'm your mistress.
Whoa.
And I was like, wow, okay. Like, it just stopped me in my tracks. And she had said that, or tried to say that nicely, probably about 50 times the 5 years previous to her just ripping out my soul and then giving it back to me. And I was so grateful for that, because then I said, all right, what am I doing? What works for my rhythm? So some pastors, they take their Mondays as their Sabbath. That didn't work for me, Dale.
Yeah.
Because I felt Tuesday morning, I was already behind.
Yeah, well, Monday you got to recap what happened the day before, but you've also got to start planning for what's coming. So I understand not taking Monday.
So I didn't take Monday. And so I said, okay, so what are a few things I could do to practice Sabbath in principle and in practical reality? So in principle, what I did was I limited my nights out during the week to 2. I'll go out a third night if it's an emergency, or if it's something that's a quarterly thing, or, something that's not normal.
Not normal.
No more than 2 nights out, because my kids would tell me that dinner was like my second lunch break. And then I went back to work. And my kid said that to me. It's another thing that just crushed my soul. So I really protect my nights as much as possible. And then Friday afternoons, I found myself at work in the office, fine-tuning the last 2% of my sermon for the 40th time. and meanwhile, my wife is home without the kids. And so I just, you know what, Heather, I'm just going to commit Friday afternoons to you. At noon, I'm getting out. And I don't care if we go to Costco, if we go to the beach, get a cup of coffee, go out east. We have beautiful, we're not in the city out here. We're close to the city, but we have some beautiful rural beach stuff out here. And that has just transformed our marriage and my spirit, even where I look forward to Friday afternoon, and then Saturday. Every once in a while there's a church thing, but it doesn't feel like the end of the world when that happens, because I had such a great Friday with my wife, and then Saturday I can do some projects around the house, so the church can have a work party for a few hours, and doesn't feel like I got to get out of here. So you ever rush to relax? You know what I found, Dale? Rushing to relax doesn't work. You don't
relax. No, you don't relax. No.
I'm stressed out before I even start trying to relax.
Yeah. In fact, one of the things I've committed to do now, and not everyone can do this, but when I do vacations now, it's going to be 2 weeks, because it takes a week for me to shut it down.
Amen, brother.
It takes a week. It literally takes me a week. You talk about rushing to relax. I understand it. And I just to see that so many of us, we're just not healthy, and we perpetuate this stuff, and there's not been anyone to kind of call us out and say, hey, what you're doing is not good. Remember when Moses was trying to do everything, and his father-in-law said, dude, this isn't sustainable. And what we're seeing now in ministry, and there's lots of things that have brought this about. Obviously the pandemic did that, but we're seeing that what we've been doing is not sustainable, and we're not healthy. And as I have mentioned several times, I'm very thankful that now pastors, for the first time in my lifetime, are reaching out and saying, I'm not healthy. I'm not doing well. I need help. And so I'm really glad to hear that you prioritized your marriage, especially once your wife already identified the other woman in your life, which happened to be the church. Yep.
So that was brutal.
Oh, well, here's what I want to do. I want to take a short break, and then when we come back from the break, I want to transition and talk about the ministry that you provide for the local church. So short break. We'll be right back. Okay, back here with Michael, just kind of talking through all things church and serving on Long Island and the impact of that and what it's like. But I want to transition a little today and talk about, Michael, you have a ministry designed to support churches outside being the pastor of your local church. Tell us a little bit about that. What is that?
Yeah, so the church I'm currently serving, it was a revitalization. So we're in Oddity in New York. And on Long Island especially, we have like 7 acres, multiple buildings. And what happened when I walked in the door, we were about 40 people. and we were averaging high 60s at the age bracket, and there was no Sunday school, no, kids ministry, and it was a typical revitalization, but it was really desperate because of the largeness of the property and the overhead and the buildings. And so by God's grace, we just got to work, and we prayed a lot and we worked a lot. And to be honest, we fought a lot. We fought a lot of battles to
Sure.
bring this church back to a place where it could be healthy spiritually again. But once we did that, once we made sure that God was getting the glory, that we were gospel-centered, and that we were living out the Great Commandment, and that we wanted to be on mission in the Great Commission, God just did what only God can do. And he
Sure.
grew us from like 40 to 400 in a very short amount of time. And it was this beautiful chaos, very challenging. I remember feeling guilty when pastors would ask me how I'm doing, and I would share how stressed out I was. And then I would remember that they were experiencing a different story. They were in a decline and they were struggling. And I'm complaining about, oh, we had 5 new families get saved and we're trying to get them plugged in. And it just, God kind of in that moment spoke to my heart and said, Mike, I'm growing you bigger so that you can help and get smaller. And I said, all right, Lord, what does that mean? Like, you just spoke that into my heart. And it took me a few years to figure it out. But it ended up manifesting this revitalized ministry. When this started, the terminology wasn't even being used.
Yeah.
I remember the first time I read it, it was an article by Tom Rainer years ago. And I've been, so I'm a church revitalizer. That's what I'm doing. So we started a conference called the Revitalized Conference. That was our first step. And we invited some people to come out. And, we had Ed Stetzer and Carl came out, and, we had Tom Rainer come out, and some great speakers who normally wouldn't come. They'd come to New York, but not to Long Island, which is different. And we just saw God's favor. And you know what, Dale? Churches around here we're so grateful that, the it church, right? We're not the it church anymore, by the way. But for a minute, we were the it church, didn't care about itself alone, that immediately what we wanted to do was pour out the resources God was pouring into their ministries around us. And it was transformative for our area because it started a dialogue between fellow pastors. And we started building trust across the aisle.
That's good. So you call it the Church Revitalization Center, is that correct?
Yep. So the Revitalized Conference now has grown into a whole revitalization ministry. So we just launched the Church Revitalization Center, and we do a few things. Some we've been doing for years, some we're rolling out. So we do annual conferences. We're going to switch it to January of every year. We're going to have our Revitalized Conference. We do Revitalized Roadmaps, which we'll talk a little bit about. We're developing a master class for that. We have some coaching. We do church replanting with some partners. We build multiplication centers. Right now, we're finishing up a multiplication center in our church with a church incubator with a 50-person mini sanctuary with a little mini fellowship hall, a Sunday school room / seminary training room, and a kids area with bathrooms in a different part of our building that will actually host 2 church plants every Sunday.
That's wild.
Well, so we're really excited about it. We're working with Be the Church out of Michigan on that. That's been a real blessing for us.
So let's talk a second I want to get some of the details of all the things you just mentioned. That was a lot. But you and I, when we were together in Alabama, I told you that one of the things that scares me today, and I was happy to see that you agreed with this, is that the whole revitalization movement, if we can call it that, because yes, obviously, if churches are dying, we need them to come back. But if revitalize, if that only means that you're going to paint the building, stick some young people on the stage, put in new carpet, but not change the basic focus, structure, mission, vision of the church, all you've done is kick the can down the street. So when you talk about revitalize, what is it you are literally saying there? Because I love your understanding of it.
Revitalization is a resurrection. It's not a repackage.
There you go.
Right. So I could put a nicer suit in a dead body and it's still dead. Right. So when you bury me,
that's been my concern. There you go.
Right, you bury me in a $1,000 suit, I'm still dead. And so that's what a lot of churches are doing. They're looking for that silver bullet. Looking for the more attractive worship team, the younger pastor with the flannel and the Nike Airs. They're looking for these. I don't want to call them gimmicks, but they're looking for this repackage, and they don't recognize what they really need is for God to resurrect them and revive their own hearts for Him. And then out of that will come church revitalization, and then eventually community revitalization.
So here I am, I'm pastoring a church, I'm here in South Carolina, and we're not doing well, and I need your help. What would you do? What would be the process involved?
So one of the things that we have found to be super effective is something called the Revitalization Roadmap. And this is really something we use. It's a cohort model we run. We're also making it a master class for those who don't have the time for the cohort, to help churches and their pastors get back on the road to greater health together. Because the bottom line is this, Dale. The church is the church is the church. We've made it very complicated. But since the book of Acts, the church has consisted in every generation, in every culture, with 4 key components. There are 4 things that make a church. First, you got to have a pastor and a leadership structure. Every church from the first church had a leadership structure. The second, every church has a congregation, a church body, the people that come and worship at that place. Third, every church is in a neighborhood. It's somewhere surrounded by people that need to be reached with the gospel. And then every church has a direction. Whether they're just aimless and wandering or they're intentional, I don't know. A lot of churches are just aimless and not intentional, but every church does have a direction. So there's a leader, there's a congregation, there's a neighborhood, and there's a direction that church is heading in. Every church, no matter whether you're in Georgia, South Carolina, Texas, Alabama, New York, those things will matter in context to you. And that's what we kind of touched on. And we realized, okay, that's what we're going to deal with.
Okay.
So what we've done is we've created this process. It's about 4 months. Once again, I want to work in rhythm with a pastor's life. I don't want him to feel like it's another thing that is stopping him from practicing Sabbath, loving his wife, engaging with his children, serving his church. So we said, well, what kind of rhythm would a pastor work into his schedule? So we do it 4 months, twice a year. Once in the fall, once in kind of the late winter into the spring. We don't do it over the summer, right? You can do the master class at your own leisure, self-paced, wherever, whenever. But the cohorts, we try to leave some space for pastors over the summer. So we do 4 months. First month is get to know yourself.
Okay.
Because I tell you, I say this to pastors all the time. No one lies to you more than you lie to yourself.
That's true. That's absolutely true.
And so, when I read the Emotionally Healthy series by Pete Scazzaro, and I took the assessment, I came up like an emotional infant. You're laughing. I wish I was making it.
How old were you when you did that?
Yesterday. No, I'm just kidding. This is when it first came out, and I was shocked. And let me tell you something.
And
else.
how long had you been in ministry? Those are the 2 things I want. That was something you did later down the line, right?
I was a decade in. At least.
That's why I wanted to kind of pinpoint that.
Oh, yeah, which scared the life out of me. It really did. And now I want to tell you something else. We take these cohorts, and out of all the cohorts we've ever done, recently, my current cohort is the first time we have 2 pastors in the cohort that both qualify as emotional adults.
Really?
That's never happened before.
Are they older?
Yes.
Okay.
And the 2 things they have in common is they've been through an intense suffering at a few churches in their carear that forced them to get help. Yeah. So
those guys probably reached out for help. That's how they got there.
Yeah. I mean, so these guys but it's the only cohort so we do this. First of all, we want to know how you're doing spiritually. Right? Because you only pour out what God's pouring in. It's only so long you could do Bible reading and sermon prep and call it devotional time before you just don't hear from God anymore. So we want to make sure you're practicing spiritual disciplines.
And I do want to say this in the midst of that. The sad news is we get to a place where we can still keep going when we don't hear from God anymore.
Yes.
Which
is why the spirit, you don't feel the spirit sometimes because it's mechanical, right?
It's scary, man.
That's right. And then we deal with the emotional health. We do some emotional assessments. Then we do some personality profiles. We just, and listen, we do these, all these are short. We don't give you the 7-hour take this 40 pages, because once again, we want to work in the rhythm, and pastors want practical things they could learn about themselves. And what happens is by the end of this time, they have a good 360 of kind of where they are spiritually, emotionally, even intellectually in regards to ministry skill sets. They discover some things that maybe they haven't admitted yet, but will say, yeah, you know what? I don't know how to do that.
Yeah.
Seminary never trained me for that. I feel lost.
It didn't train us for much of anything.
Right. Like the world I live in and the seminary I was trained in are two different universes at this point. So that's month one. And part of month one, Dale, is about these pastors in these cohorts becoming a community, colleagues, co-laborers. They are supporting one another, get to know one another. They talk offline and support one another in between our meetings.
There's four focuses here. Do you do all four simultaneously, or are you like, do we do this part
one
first?
At a time?
Okay. All right.
Focus leverage. So month one, first meeting, we were about an hour and a half. We introduce a topic. We walk through what it means to know yourself, why this is important.
Okay.
And then in between, they take an assessment. And then the second meeting, 2 weeks later, we unpack what we've learned.
Okay.
So it's more of a workshop, the second meeting, where we have some peer-to-peer learning. And it really, that's where the gold is. You know that. When
Sure.
people start talking around the tables.
Yes.
It's beautiful.
Yes. We'll see that all the time. So we work on the individual. The next step, so you said that you have a pastor and you have a congregation. Was that number
That's
two?
right.
Okay. So what happens there?
Second month is know your church.
Okay.
Get to know your church. Listen, I found out some things about my church during the pandemic period, right? When it was pandemics, protests, and political elections. Oh my. I mean, we were not in Kansas anymore, Dorothy. I found out some things that I did not know. So we got to know where our churches really are, not where we think we are. Because one of the things that I think most pastors suffer from is inattentional blindness. And maybe we could put a link in for the awareness test.
I'll put all the links to whatever you want to put.
Yeah, we'll put a link into the awareness test. And
Okay.
I'm not going to say exactly what it is, but I'm going to tell you this, Pastor. Sometimes we're so busy counting the wrong things that we miss the big picture. We miss what God's trying to do. And I want you to click on the link below. I want you to watch this video because I'll tell you what, I've been in a room of 500 seasoned pastors and not one saw what they needed to see. And why is that? Well, we only see what we expect to see.
Yeah.
So if you've ever sold your house, Dale, the real estate agent comes in and says to you, hey, Dale, you're going to finish painting your bathroom? There's a corner you never finished. And you go, wait a second, what? Well, hey, there's a hole downstairs. Right by the garage door. You remember doing it 7 years ago, but then you forgot about it because you don't care anymore. Right?
You're preaching now.
So you don't see it. And
Yeah.
so, Pastor, listen, we're so used to unhealthy behavior in our churches that we don't see it as unhealthy anymore. We've normalized abnormal behavior.
That's so good.
Right? So what the church health assessment does is it forces you to pull back the curtain and have a good, honest look at where your church is. And I'll tell you, man, the top three things, right? For those of you over 40, I feel like David Letterman right there. So if you're under 40, just Google it, okay? He's a top 10 list. But anyway, the top three things, didn't matter if it was a Haitian church in the Bronx, a largely Caucasian church in the suburbs, Filipino, Hispanic, primary language, Spanish church, none of that mattered, okay? The primary thing the churches were missing, number one, evangelism, right? The Great Commission has really become the Great Omission at this point. People just are not doing it, and it cuts across ages and cultures. Number two, defined discipleship. In other words, just saying we have small groups is not a discipleship plan.
That's right.
It's saying you have small groups.
Yeah.
And then the third thing was we're finding that our church people are by and large biblically illiterate.
Boy, that's true.
Right? So meaning 20% don't read their Bible at all, even on Sunday. They're thinking about what they're ordering for lunch when you're preaching. 20%, right, read it a few times during the week. They have a devotional life, right? Praise the Lord.
How many
60%,
was that?
40%.
20%.
So the
okay.
book, right, the bookends or I don't read the Bible at all. I think Sodom and Gomorrah are cousins, right? The other end is like, I got my daily bread. I really believe in that. By and large, I read my Bible. Now, the 60%, the majority, they know just enough to bring their Bible to church.
Yeah. Which we really don't do that anymore because it's because it's on the screens and that kind of thing. So,
but they're paying attention.
Okay.
Right. But here's the thing. You wouldn't expect to go to the gym once a week for an hour and be a competitive athlete. You wouldn't expect to go to school 1 hour a week and expect to get a PhD, but yet Christians go to church once a week. It's the only time they read their Bible, and they think they're going to mature into spiritual adults. And that's just not possible.
Yeah.
So pastors got to like take the blinders off and get to know where their church is weak so they can start strengthening it. Right? You're not going to fix something you can't admit is broken.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. So the first step is the pastor. The second step is the congregation. What's the third one?
Know your community.
Okay.
You got to know who's living in your neighborhood, man.
Boy, and that's so hard because they change so much. So many established churches were established with one type of people living in the community, and those people aren't there anymore. So
that's us.
Yeah.
That is absolutely us. So I grew up, my neighborhood when I was a kid was all Italian. So when I moved out of my neighborhood, I was like, wow, there are people and they eat grilled chicken and mashed potatoes and carrots. And what is that?
I just got to throw this in for you when you brought it up. But when you say I live in an Italian community, I just imagine every night at dinner, the place just had to smell awesome.
Oh, listen,
we love Italian, so that's why.
It's music and passion and fighting, and I would walk around the neighborhood, and people would come out and give me fresh tomatoes. I would eat them like they were apples, right? So and then I moved out a little further east, and then in a more not a lot of people that were raised kind of the way I was raised, and I discovered that people eat things like shake and bake chicken, and they call it cuisine. So praise the Lord for that. But I don't want to get distracted. But so when I graduated high school, there was one person of color in my graduating class. Last year, in my graduating high school, I think it was 55% of the graduates were people of color. Think about that for a minute. Let it just resonate.
Major change. Major change.
And plus, that's kind of a nutshell of what's happening nationally. So I know that some of you are hearing me saying, yeah, well, you're in New York, and hear me now. Between the years of 2035 and like 2045, at some point, the number is kind of unsure, but let's call it 2040, right? America will become a majority minority nation.
Yeah.
Meaning there will be no majority. Right. So we're going to have to learn to live in that tension and get to know our community again. And yeah, they may look different. They may have been raised different. They may even speak a different language, right? But like when the Bible says, love your neighbor as yourself, like there's no conditions or clauses to that, right? Whoever's in my neighborhood is by definition my neighbor biblically. So knowing your community again, because when I got here, people were driving 2 towns over to come to our church because they had moved out of our neighborhood, but stayed at our church. And within 5 years of having an intentional emphasis on learning who our neighbors were and loving them, we now have people that walk to church, they walk to our vacation Bible school, they walk the kids, because they live across the block, they live in the neighborhood. And I got to tell you, the first time it happened, Dale, it legitimately brought tears to my eyes.
I'm sure it did. Yeah. You know, Michael, I worked with a church. I'm not even going to say what state it was in, but I worked with a church recently doing a vision day that was literally located by one of the largest high school campuses in America. And no one from that area came to the church.
Yeah.
The people were driving, 20 miles away, and they're not even making an effort, if you will, to connect with the people. And there's thousands of people literally within a block of them. And that's a mindset, though, isn't it? I mean, isn't that what happens? We get in this mindset, and so we don't reach them.
You get locked into who's there, and you forget that you're called to also reach out. So, it's evangelism and discipleship. It's go and make. I remember, Dale, the first year I was here, it was one Saturday morning, the entire school district had a parade right in front of the house in the church for homecoming. And I had said to the church, I said, what do we do? Like, why are we not out there supporting the homecoming parade, maybe giving them waters, usually it's kind of warm out. They're throwing candy. And they're like, yeah, no one ever comes from the neighborhood. And that has changed. Now we go out and the people in our community go, hey, it's Cornerstone. Hey, Cornerstone. And it's just being there, handing out little 8-ounce waters and just letting them know. And some of the families have gotten saved and they come over. And nothing speaks more powerful than when someone else knows from the school district runs over, gives me a big hug with their kid.
Yeah.
And says, oh, that's Pastor Mike. That's our church.
Yeah. That's cool. That's cool.
Come on, man. There's nothing better than that.
That's cool, man. That's cool. Okay. So the pastor's the focus, the congregation's the focus, the community's the focus. What's the final one?
Final one is you have to kind of know where you're going from here. Right?
Is that if you personally or as a church?
The church.
Okay.
You got to know your plan.
Okay.
Right. Well, somebody said it's much smarter to me. If you fail to plan, you plan to fail.
Mm-hmm.
But what I'm finding,
actually,
I was Dale. So I thought it was. I didn't want to, throw that out there.
Just kidding.
But if you go in the same direction you've always gone, you'll go right back to the same destination. It's like, in Einstein's definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. Well, that pretty much defines many churches in North America. Well, we don't like what's going on. All right, why don't you change it? No, we're going to do it the way we always do it. Well, then this is exactly what's going to keep happening.
Yeah.
So what we do is we take the leadership, what we learned about the leader, the pastor, we take what we learned about the church and where they're at, and then who's living in the neighborhood. And we take one, maybe two, but most of the time it's just one next step.
Okay.
Right? One change of direction to bring that church back to greater health. I'll give you an example. One of our churches found out through the Know Your Community assessment that in their neighborhood, there were 4 times the number of single mothers than the national average.
Wow.
Now, this was a church that had no kids in the church. And so what we did was, based on the pastor's gifting, the leadership's gifting, the church and their resources, and what we learned about that community, and we designed this outreach program for single mothers and their kids.
So smart.
So we designed some after-school homework help and some athletic activities. And at the beginning of the year, we had a backpack drive and some supplies. And now that church is bustling with young life and kids and these single mothers. Some of them were saved. Some of them got saved. The kids come to the programs. They love the church. There are sounds of babies in the nursery again. Kids are spilling things in the hallway. Praise God. They're making a mess, right? It's so that one step gave them hope.
Yes.
Right? It showed them this can be done.
Yes.
And then generally a lot of churches say, hey, will you stay on for 4 more months, 6 more months, and just coach us? So we've done so many, Dale, we've changed leadership structures. One church said, hey, listen, our leadership structure is so backwards that we can't make changes. That's the most important thing. We did that.
So much church government, it stunts growth because it bottlenecks because of it.
10 people, they have 15 committees. You do the math. I don't know how that worked.
Yeah.
One pastor actually said, you know what? I should have retired 5 years ago. The most important thing we could do is, can you help bring a pastor on for our church? So we did that.
That's so good, man.
It's just, and what's great about this, Dale, is it's not plug and play.
No.
What worked for the church that had the neighborhood with the single moms, they didn't need a leadership structure change. Yeah. What we did with them was in their context.
That's so good, man.
We're not trying to make them be anything they're not.
You speaking my language.
Yeah, it's really
just before we run out of time. I do want to say this. What Michael's talking about is basically developing a strategy for your church. I know small churches don't like that word, but it's just a plan. That's all a strategy is. Simon Sinek said one time. He said, it really doesn't matter what process you use to get where you're going if you don't know where you're going. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what you choose. If you have no idea where you're going, it doesn't matter how you get there. So before we run out of time, or at the end of this podcast, and obviously I could talk to you for hours, and I will when we get together in a few weeks. You're sitting at coffee with a pastor, and he's really discouraged. She's really discouraged. Their ministry is just flat. It's plateaued. and they're thinking about giving up. You're sitting with them. You got 5 minutes with them. What are you going to say to them, Michael?
First, I'm going to tell them that ultimately, God loves him for who he is, not what he does for him.
Mm.
And that he is a person, not just a pastor.
Mm-hmm.
So the first thing I want to do is separate the person from the pastor.
That's so good.
Because, Pastor, you are a person, right? You are someone that Christ looked at in your worst moment, said, man, I'm so glad I could die for him.
Mm-hmm.
I'm so glad I could die for that person. So that probably my main focus is just leaning into the person, not just the pastor. And then we get into the church stuff after. But when you got a pastor who's discouraged and hurting, the first thing I think we have to recognize is we're looking at a human being, not a human doing.
Yeah.
So I just want to help him be whole in the Lord before we worry about, helping the church. Because ultimately, I think that is helping the church.
It is helping the church. A healthy pastor creates a healthy church. And I can guarantee you an unhealthy pastor is going to maintain and perpetuate an unhealthy ministry. It's just a fact.
Very true. Dude,
you are such a blessing. I'm so glad you're my friend. I'm so glad that we got reacquainted after I cut you off of Twitter.
Well, I'm glad you introduced me to grits. So I had grits for the first time. I want to thank you for that.
Heather had fried green tomatoes, and so we're bringing you along, man. We're bringing you along. So
we're working it. We're gonna bring some pasta fazool down for you next time we see you.
Hey, I'm gonna be with you in a few weeks. I'm ready to eat what you got, man. Thank you so much for being my friend, and I'm looking forward to serving together in the days ahead. I'm very excited about what you're doing with the Church Revitalization Center. I'm gonna have all the links of anything you want to add. I'll put that in the show notes for this today. And if someone wanted to get in touch with you today, what's the easiest way to connect with you as far as like through email?
Be Mike@churchrevitalize.org.
Okay. I'll put that in the show notes as well. Thank you again, brother, for your time.
All right, Dale. Great to be with you, brother. God bless.
Thanks for listening to the 95 Podcast. We look forward to sharing another episode with you next week. In the meantime, visit our website at 95network.org. The website is loaded with great resources created for small and mid-sized church leaders. Until next time, have a great week.